Good morrow, scholars. Welcome back to my, what do you call it, video essay on Star Wars The Last Jedi and my thoughts on it versus the larger Star Wars universe as a whole, both Legends and canon. I don't know why I ramble. Anyway, I'd like to continue the train of thought that we kind of had sort of overall for the last video. And that's kind of sort of, I guess, boiled down to the essential bits is that there's a lot of, I guess some would say rehashing, and others might say influence, you know, wherever you fall on that uh, particular, what's the word? Line, you know, a little bit of A, a little bit of B, somewhere in the middle. Who knows? And it's not necessarily a bad thing. I know that I keep saying that in each of my videos, I think, so far. It really isn't. Some of you might not like it, some of you might, for maybe even the same reason. Who knows? But still, like I keep saying, we've got to at least acknowledge that these things are present. We don't have to agree. We don't have to change each other's minds. I think that's what's the most important thing. We just have to agree that each of us sees something a little bit different. And that's why I'm kind of doing this, is because it's been a while since the movie came out. Everyone's seen it. It's been spoiled for, whoever didn't want to go see it. And I've really had a chance to go through everything, compare it to what I knew, go over some newer stuff that I wasn't quite as familiar with, all that stuff. And depending on how you look at it, there's a lot of rehashing, or there's a lot of influence. And I really wish I could say that you're just being negative if you feel like it's just a retread of what's come before, but the evidence doesn't lie. As much as I love The Force Awakens, it is very clearly the first, the fourth. It is very clearly Episode 4, ending with essentially a combination of Episode 5 and Episode 6. And I remember telling everyone that Episode 8 was just going to be mostly Episode 5 ending like Episode 6. And that's essentially what happened, and I was only half joking. I really didn't expect them to just copy, paste, and then very gently change some stuff around, but we'll get to that in a minute. The first thing I'd like to notice, or note rather, is Finn's character arc in Episode 8 is essentially what happens with him in Episode 7, and he hasn't had a chance to really learn his lesson that he learned by the end of the previous movie. And I know a lot of my friends especially didn't like that, because Finn was one of their favorite characters introduced in the last movie, and they really wanted to see where he would go, and then this movie came out and he didn't go anywhere. He did try to leave, though. But on the other hand, you kind of have to remember it's that same day, which I think I've mentioned at least twice before, really brings the movie down in terms of what it could have accomplished, because you've got this time constraint that is just bogging everything else down around it. If it had been a time skip, as is tradition, I kind of want to put in a screenshot of South Park, but let's not get into that. But if there had been a time skip where Finn could have actually had a chance to learn the lesson and let it sink in, I think that would have really helped his story arc a lot. Mostly because they couldn't get away with doing it. Here, I feel like they kind of had the excuse set up for them specifically for, people who would complain about his storyline, how it's essentially the same thing. He hasn't really learned anything. And you're like, well, I mean, he hasn't had a chance to let it sink in, like I just said. And who knows? Maybe you don't mind it. Maybe you like seeing somebody go from one movie to the next and kind of ram the way through the whole last scene. Never mind, you remember. But me, not necessarily as a writer, because I've been trying for like the last 10 years and I haven't gotten anything put together that I would be willing to let other people read. But I really would prefer seeing some character growth instead of people just telling us there's character growth. And I have a pretty good example that'll segue into my next point. Do you guys happen to recall, way back in the day, I guess it wasn't that way back, but in Naruto, the second half, when Kakashi's teaching Naruto how to do, what was it? They had to practice with that little leaf and him and all his shadow clones in order to learn like proper chakra control. Naruto had a lot of moments like that, and Kakashi even tells Naruto not to think of it, not to think of his training as what you get in shonen manga, where the main character goes through like a little bit of training, and most of it's off screen, and then he shows up almost immediately after, and he's way more powerful than he was before. We get to see a lot of character growth. We get to see Naruto go from like a bratty little kid, up to antics to get attention, to somebody who actively wants to protect people. And I feel like The Last Jedi's Finn wanted to do something similar, but they forgot that he learned a lesson in the previous movie, and so they kind of fumbled the ball, so to speak. And the reason I brought it up, not only because, noticeable character growth for Naruto, and about 2 steps back and a step forward for Finn, is because that is a fair assessment of what happens, and I've mentioned it before, with Rey. She doesn't actually train in any real capacity, and her power level just essentially skyrockets for no good reason. And I've talked about in a previous video, if I recall correctly, that the director said that she's learning these force techniques by taking them from Kylo Ren whenever they do their force bond. And while I'll acknowledge that I think I talked about this, I just want to make sure, while I'll acknowledge that she can learn what the techniques are and how to do them, she still needs to learn to be able to perform these techniques. And I feel like that's where the problem is for most people, is that she's able to do these things, but there's no justification for her to be able to, rather than knowing how. There's a big difference between reading something in a book, like I normally do, and actively doing something. Like, I could learn how to swim by reading what to do from a book, but that doesn't mean that my body will know what to do if I'm out in the middle of the ocean or something. Well, nothing so drastic. Lake, maybe? I mean, I'm fat enough to where I could sort of float. Never mind. Let's not get into that. And I know what you're thinking, and I really wish I didn't have to say it, but she really does come off as like Mary Sue-ish. And that's not to say, like, I know a lot of people see the title, or I guess the nomenclature, Mary Sue, and they kind of, I don't want to say overreact to it, because that's not really the case. But people seem to think like it refers only to women, and that you only notice it when it's women and not men. But one of the reasons I don't really care much for the, like, let's say, the Die Hard movies is because this is a person who's way out of their depth, should not be able to do any of the stuff that they're doing, and succeeds anyway. Now, I will acknowledge, at least with Die Hard, he works hard for it, and you can see him visibly struggling, which I think is more important than seeing him succeeding all the time. But, that's not really the point. She's married Suish because simultaneously she's special and not special. And it doesn't make any sense because the movie tells us one thing and then shows us another thing. And what I mean by that is they tell us that she's not important to the story. She's not special. She's not been chosen. She's just somebody who kind of walked into the story and then now she's the main character. But then one of the things I don't like with Rian Johnson in out of universe in regards to what he's talking about with the movie is that she's now some sort of a vessel for the Force, the light side specifically, and that's why she's as strong as she is. And they say the same thing happened with Luke in order for him to defeat, Darth Vader and the Emperor. And the same thing happened with Anakin in order to counteract what Palpatine and Plagueis were up to. And I'm like, you just said she's not the chosen one, and now you're telling us she is the chosen one. And, they can't they can't have their cake and eat it too, or eat your cake and have it too. Which do you prefer? Never mind. Do you know what I mean? And I feel like the movie loses sight of the message it's trying to tell us, especially in regards to Rey. Because the movies, we don't really see anything about her that shows us that she is particularly Jedi-like. She's much more close to Luke in Episode 5 than anything else, which, I kind of touched on before. And yet, when she's facing down Snoke, he has her frozen and whatnot, he tells her that she has the heart of a true Jedi. But we know from past experience that she's not acting like a Jedi. She's not thinking like a Jedi. They're telling us she is. The whole point of being a Jedi is, to do the opposite of what she does in the movie. And even like Pablo Hidalgo and everybody else that's been working in the Star Wars universe, making Rebels, or even way back in Clone Wars, possibly the new show, all that stuff. They tell us like doing all these flashy, super powerful Force techniques actually weakens your connection to the Force, and yet that's all she's got. And they tell us that she's a true Jedi in the movie, but they don't actually show us that. They just say it a lot, and it kind of gets grating. Because even if you compare her to Luke, and I know a lot of people say that Luke only trained for like a week and then he left, and, that's not much better than Rey, but you got to remember that's not true. The minimum amount of time he would have spent would be about 6 months of Dagobah, because they forget that they're just seeing like the highlights of Leia and Han's trip to Bespin. They even say it's going to take a while without a hyperspace. Shoot, what's the term? Well, without hyperspace, I can't think of what they call their engines. Anyway, what was I saying? But between episode 5 and episode 6, Luke keeps getting told that he's not actually a Jedi. Like, he's powerful, he's learned a lot, but he's not a true Jedi yet. In this, Rey doesn't learn anything. She gets a bunch of powers that she hasn't actually earned, and the most powerful Darksider ever to be seen in the movies tells us, that she's the shining example of what it means to be a Jedi, and it doesn't really work. And I've kind of gone off topic of what this whole thing is about, but not necessarily, because this whole video is going to be about various rehashes and whatnot. The reason I feel like it fits is because she actually is very reminiscent of somebody from Legends that I think most people called like the Jedi Exile, Mitra Surik, if you haven't heard of her before. Her story is actually really interesting, and she had this really weird ability that that the Jedi of her time had never really seen before, where she could copy really any like lightsaber technique or force power that she's seen just once, and be able to do it perfectly. And she was another one of those odd cases where she was discovered, force sensitive. Sorry, did I just apologize to my microphone? She was introduced to the Order when she was a young adult rather than, a young child, much like Luke. And they thought about not training her because of how old she was. Ultimately, they decided to train her, and she became one of the most powerful Jedi in their history, not just in their time. But it's pretty similar to what we see with Rey. The only difference is she was trained by Jedi Masters, and Rey wasn't. You know what I mean? And I feel bad because I really believed in Rey in the first movie, and I defended her and their choices for what they did with her character and, everything. And I feel like they really squandered those people that kind of flocked to her defense. Not that she really needs to be defended. I don't mean it like that or anything. It's just from a purely story criticism perspective, it just really drops the ball in a lot of ways, and it's upsetting because I really was looking forward to seeing where they were going to go, and I feel like I said, they really squandered what they had set up. Let's see, who else did I want to talk about? What did I have? Oh yeah, that's right. I know I talked previously in, I think it was the last video, about Jaina Solo and how similar she is to Rey. Well, there's another Solo in Legends that she's actually much closer to. The only difference being is that Rey's Force sensitive and this one is not. Her name, I think, would be pronounced Anya Solo. She was from the Star Wars Legacy comics, where it takes place, I think, around 137 years after the Battle of Yavin, give or take. And she's non-Force sensitive. She even teams up with a young black male. She was on a junk planet, and she just trying to find her place in the galaxy, and they accidentally stumble into a greater galaxy-wide plot to basically take everything over. And again, these are a lot of broad strokes in terms of how similar they are, but you can't deny the fact that there are a lot of similarities between her and these two solos in Mitra Surik. They are definitely there, even if you take only like 20% here, 30% there, and then however much of wherever else you want to go from. I really feel like they should have focused more on the story and adapting it so that it made sense. I think that's the biggest problem I have with this movie, is that a lot of it happens and it makes no sense. And you could say the same for the prequels, and I'll grant you there's a little bit here and there, but I actually enjoy the prequels, like even as a kid, even till today. But I also read the books, and while I only watched the Clone Wars for the first time about 3 years ago, because I couldn't really get over the art style when it originally came out, I really did feel like the plots at least were going in the same direction. There might have been a few stumbles off the path here and there, and it might not have made some sense if you didn't have some backstory that was kind of important that they didn't go over in the movie because there wasn't time, and it wasn't necessarily important to the story they wanted to tell. But I feel like The Last Jedi didn't know what story it was telling, and that's where a lot of its problems came from, and it just like took a bunch of stuff from previous things, stuffed them into the movie, and it didn't figure out where anything should go. If that makes sense to you guys. Ooh, that actually took a lot out of me. I don't know what it is. I talk with my hands. I know how that sounds, but when I talk with people, usually I don't do it in person anymore, but I kind of try and keep focus when I'm talking to you guys on camera, because I will wander off. If you've seen any of my Let's Reads, you know for a fact that I will just go. And it's also, it's before I start to ramble, I just want to say, I really hope that you guys are at least entertained by, like, not necessarily insight, because I don't want to sound like I think I know better in regards to how this movie was than you guys, but insight at least into my brain and how I perceive these things. Because I know a lot of us kind of get tired of all these clickbait things that we've seen, especially after The Last Jedi. There's all these, like, Star Wars has been ruined forever by Disney sort of things, and like Mark Hamill doesn't like the new movies and all that stuff. I'm like, stop it. You're not helping anything. The movie itself had problems. The story, I think, could have been an amazing story. It would have adapted about 9 different stories from Legends, all boiled down to one comprehensive work, and then kind of springboard from that the new Star Wars canon. I know there's been a lot of books and such before this, but by and large, Star Wars is the saga films. You can only watch the original trilogy, the prequel trilogy, and I guess if you want to say, since the third one hasn't come out yet, the sequel trilogy, and you will get the important story. I think that tends to get forgotten when people complain, such as myself, about how the old EU is now the Legends continuity. And you've got to remember, like, even back then, a lot of that stuff was ranked much lower on the continuity scale. You know, you had the movies at the very top, and then you had stuff like the Clone Wars a little bit beneath it, and then you had certain books beneath that, and then underneath that you had like the junior novels, and then underneath that you had like the video games and stuff like that. So, you know, people would pick and choose what they thought was like more important to the canon because it was what they wanted. And we're getting a lot of that now. As much as I, you know, say like the reason I didn't like The Last Jedi is from a writing and story-driven perspective, I still don't really like how they did with with Luke's story. But just because I feel like that's kind of a rehash of a bunch of different things, and then they kind of came to a conclusion that I think doesn't make sense. That by itself does not mean that they made a mistake, or it was an error, or they did something stupid, or that they ruined Star Wars forever. It just means that they did something new-ish. Well, they did something new in that it's a new movie. They did something different, which also is technically not true because, as I discussed in the previous video, the story is not the same. You can hate the new trilogy because of that. You can love it because of that. You can be indifferent. You know, so many different things that you could feel about it, and I can't be the one to say, no, you're supposed to think of it like this because this is how I've always seen it. That's not the case. I want you guys to think about what Star Wars means to you. If it's, like Mark Hamill said, your happy place where you go so that you can feel safe and like a kid and like just enjoy some downtime, great, I'm right there with you. My head's always been 2 steps away from a galaxy far, far away, and I wish I could say that I used my time wisely. I absolutely did not. I know a lot of people would like to think that if they lived in the Star Wars universe, they'd be some sort of like powerful dark sider or like the strongest Jedi ever. Like, no, honestly, I think I'd much rather just be, just, you know, a farmer of some kind or something, you know. But that's not important. The point I want to make is that Star Wars is a massive franchise. It has been going on for decades with no signs of really slowing down. If anything, I feel like Disney's kind of speeding it up too much, and I think that might cause it to collapse. Kind of like the recession back in 2008. But that's not why we're here. You know what I mean? Just a big balloon and never mind. But the point is that actually, what was I saying? All right, let's take a step back. Okay, Star Wars is a big franchise. It's been going on for decades. No signs of really slowing down. Kind of speeding up too much. There's going to be a lot of new additions to the story, and if there are some things that, like with me, that you see that are similar, and you compare them like side by side, and you get a magnifying glass, and you go through every single thing just to look for all these similarities, you're going to find them. But, you know, that doesn't mean like it stole from the former or anything, or it was influenced by the former. It just means like there's only so much you can do, and people are less likely to be excited for something that they don't know, which is one of the reasons why Episode 7 was so close to Episode 4. It's because it was safe. And they knew that it would get people to go see it. And they knew that people would love it because they've already seen it. They already loved it. And that pendulums smacked everybody in the head when it came back around for The Last Jedi. You know, they tried to give us something new and different, and at the same time, they ended up giving us something that was exactly the same, just kind of twisted, again, like a monkey's paw. Okay, I think I've rambled off long enough. Let me know what you guys think. I hope I didn't bore you too much. I really hope that we can do some sort of a discussion in the comments and keep it civil. And thank you, sir or madam or beyond. I don't usually respond to comments until I upload videos, so bear with me. And yeah, I think that's about it. We've got, I think I have enough for 3 or 4 more videos that I'm going to do. I try and keep them around 20 minutes, but that doesn't always happen. Again, my mind wanders. I think if you pause the video at just the right moment, you can see the exact moment that my brain, or that my mind, just got up and left. It went on a tangent and it just never really came back. Anyway, it's late. I try and record these the night before because, who knows how long it could take if I wait until the morning, even though I know because that's how I usually would do it. And I kind of prefer, having them done the night before so that I can put like a little more work into it. Also, it helps me kind of wind down a little bit. So yeah, we'll see what happens. And like I said, I like the lighting much better than when I record in the mornings because it doesn't look as washed out with the sunlight coming in. Anyway, I've rambled again. I apologize. Until next time, goodbye everybody. And I hope that I can keep the schedule going